record on this computer. It's recording. Okay, all right. So thanks everyone for joining us for what is our first meeting about reopening in fall 2020. Like you, we too are anxious to see what next year is going to look like. We've been working on it for obviously since the end of the school year last year. As we'll talk about, there are things that we have control over, things that we don't have control over, and what we're trying to do now is make the best decision possible for our kids, given the information that we have, given the constraints that we have, and set up next year so that regardless of what the shape of it is, it can be a positive one for everyone. So before we finalize anything, we definitely want to hear from the kids, who we just had a meeting with those guys at 3:30, and then from the community. And then we'll take this information and use it as we make our final plans. And then whenever we have our final plans, those will get shared out. And then I'm sure there'll be another meeting like this once we're closer to the start of the year. And we can talk more specifically about some points that we'll bring up, or like as we go through the program. There'll be several points where we just don't have the information yet, so it's hard to give some specifics. But as we get those specifics as the year progresses, then we'll be able to share with the community some exacts, because that's what people need to make decisions. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So here's our agenda for tonight. A little update on what we know and what we don't. Some very general health and safety updates. I'll talk about those a little bit more in detail. Some things to consider about what school is going to look like. Our proposal for what the daily schedule is going to look like next year. What the weekly schedule could look like, and then chance for you guys to question and comment. That being said, Ms. Corin is, she's monitoring the chat. So if I say something and you're like, McCarthy, what the heck are you talking about? Feel free to say, McCarthy, what the heck are you talking about in the chat? And then Ms. Corin will share that out. And we'll try to pause along the way so that if you actually just want to share your question with the group, you can just unmute yourself and share your questions that way as well. So just because we have questions and comments at the end, don't feel like you have to hold on to something until the very end of the presentation. If something pops up, please put it in the chat or hold on to it until we ask a question. So, because the reason why we're having this meeting is because even Mr. Friend and Mr. Corin and I were just saying, the kids had some great questions in the meeting before that we hadn't thought about. That's going to definitely help the plan going forward. So that's why we're doing the meeting, is to get your feedback. So we appreciate it. So just a disclaimer about what we know and what we don't. So the state has asked us to prepare 3 models. One model being all 387 kids walk through the high school door for the start of the school year. I can tell you with transparency that we are not planning on doing that unless something changes significantly between now and the start of school. That is unlikely to happen in any of the Sutton schools. A hybrid model, which is half the kids are in for a portion of the day or week, and then the other half come in the other day of the week. That is what we are really focusing our attention on, because for the reasons we'll discuss later on, that seems to make the most sense. And then the state has also asked us to plan for a remote plan, which is all of us go back home like we did in the spring. And that is something that we are spending time on as well, because the likelihood is that we are going to end up all being back learning remotely, because America is not very good at dealing with the coronavirus. So that is just sort of where we are at. So one question a parent might have is, what if I just want to keep my kid home for the year? I don't want to have to deal with the school. It just seems like an unsafe environment to me. That's a completely rational thought that a parent might have. So any student can request remote learning for the year. So if there's going to be a survey going out, I believe the date is August 10th or 11th, at which point we're going to be asking for people to give firm commitments on, yes, my son will be walking through the door on the first day of school, or no, my daughter will not be walking through the door on the first day of school, because obviously we need to have those numbers so that we can plan for the year. So we are going to be asking parents to give us a firm answer on that. So if you make the choice that, you know what, I don't want to have my student participate in in-person learning this year, that is a completely rational decision that we understand completely. The state is going to be providing a remote learning vendor that districts are going to be able to buy into. That is what we will be doing. So your student will still be a part of Sutton High School, be able to be in the drama club, connections, the soccer team, if we have prom and all that stuff, still fully a member of Sutton High School, but the learning and the instruction will happen from a teacher who is not connected to high school through a remote learning process that is, sort of shifted off to a different vendor. So that is what will happen for people who want to learn remotely. these things change. When we talk about health and safety, we're going to talk about that a little bit too. Currently, we are thinking the ban as it currently exists is not going to happen. The state has actually said that you cannot be playing wind instruments indoors. We'll be working with our music folks to decide what music will look like when you can't play a musical instrument or sing. And that is per DPH guidelines. The state has said that you can play your musical instruments as long as you're outside. Playing a trumpet in December in New England doesn't seem like a smart choice to me. Why they would give that guidance is beyond us, but that's the state. So we're not thinking that band and chorus and phys ed is another one that I could have added in there are going to happen, certainly not in their traditional formats, to be sure. So that being said, we're waiting on guidance for a lot of different things. And the state keeps doling it out on a Friday afternoon at the very end of the day because I don't know why. I guess we can guess why. And it puts us in the position of having to react. We've been down a road. We have to get the information, then we'll react and sort of then readjust. So we're doing our best to work with the guidance that we get from the state, but there's a lot we're still waiting on. And then the last thing I'll say is, I've been now in Sutton for 8 years. This is clearly the most challenging period that I've had to deal with since I've been here as far as a whole school goes. And one of the things that I appreciate is that when we face these things, that we kind of all put in together as a community and do the best that we can. None of what we're facing right now is ideal. None of it is what we would have wished for our kids or what we want to have school look like at all. But we can't just wish the pandemic away. We can't wish that it wasn't here, and we can't pretend that it's not. And so what we have to do as a school and as sort of an institution is we have to make decisions that are sort of our best thinking, given the information that we're given, and do right by our kids to the best that we possibly can. And that's where we're coming from with all of the decisions that we make. We're trying to create an environment where kids can learn, sort of approximate something that looks like school. But as I said in the email to the parents and email to the kids, the school that we've all experienced if you're a senior, the school that you knew for 13 years is not coming back next year. It's just not. And the longer that we hold on to that, the more disappointed we're going to be about what school can be and will be going forward. So that's not because we're glad about it or we want any of this to happen, but it is the reality. And I think the sooner that the adults and the school and the kids can all sort of understand that this is our new normal and we're going to make the best of it, then we're going to be in a better situation for it. I go back to the class of 2020. At the drop of a hat, they have their entire senior year ripped away. And they responded to it with a level of maturity and grace that I just think is such an example for us as people. So if we can sort of take a lesson from our kids and sort of approach this with sort of a can-do attitude instead of a why me attitude, then I think we're going to all be better for it. So there's zero doubt in my mind that when we come out of this, we're going to have plans and people are going to be at home and be like, why did McCarthy do this? Or why did the school do this? And that's completely understandable. But we hope that you understand that we're trying to do the best we can, given the information we have. And we understand that not everyone's going to love all of our decisions, but we are trying to make the decisions with the best interest of our kids at heart, and that's entirely where we're coming from. So that's where we're coming from, and I just thought I would stay at the top so it hopefully kind of informs us as we go forward.
Mr. McCarthy, before you move on,
Yep.
A couple people are asking if you could just clarify if the family chooses to do the remote learning model offered by the remote vendor offered by the state, is not going to be Sutton teachers teaching the students, correct?
My understanding as of right now, that is the case. I will be using the phrase "as my understanding as of right now" a lot during this presentation. I am sorry if that frustrates you. It frustrates me as well. But the guidance that we get from the state changes all the time. There was a point where the remote learning was just going to be free, and then it was not, and it changes. So we're doing the best that we can. But my understanding right now is that
Can I chime in for a minute?
Yes, you may.
So that is our thinking, certainly for high school. In the elementary school early learning center, it's our thinking that the remote learning plans will be taught by our teachers, probably set aside one teacher per grade to do that, and still waiting to figure out exactly how we'll handle remote learning in the middle school.
Thank you, Mr. Friend. Okay, go back to, okay. All right, so
I have one more question before we go on.
Sure.
If the governor says we cannot open schools, will they still be taught by an outside vendor?
No. So you'll notice that on the top, it's, well, let me take it in two parts. So if we get to August, let's play make believe, in August 31st, and that was going to be the day that we started back to school, and we were ready for the kids on August 31st, and then the governor comes on TV and says, nope, we're not going back to school, we're all going to stay home remote, then everybody would have remote learning, and all those classes would be taught by a Sutton person. However, if we're walking in the door on September 1st, at that point, you're making a choice whether or not you're going to have, Dennis Stamos teach your U.S. History 2 class, or you're going to have Teacher X on the virtual platform teach your U.S. History 2 class. Are you going to have Christina Gamble teach your pre-calculus class, or the remote teach, the sort of third-party teacher class? That part is the same. What we do, in the scenario where the governor comes in, we all end up being remote to start the school year off, and then at some point in the future we shift back to going into hybrid. And then if you're a parent and you say, well, no, I want to stick with what we have right now, I don't want to send my kid in, that is a question that we're going to have to figure out, because you'll have already been halfway down the road, or a little bit way down the road with the teacher from Sutton, but then you're not going to be coming back. And as we'll discuss, it's kind of hard for Sergio Marcucci to be teaching AP language to one group in front of him, one group that's staying home that part of the hybrid week, and a third person that he never even sees. So that's a sort of a tall task for any teacher. All right, are we all good, Annie?
One more. What about the phasing that is recommended by the MTA?
My understanding at this time, that is not something that we are considering. So per DESE requirements. All right, so some health and safety guidelines. So, this is probably what's on everyone's mind first and foremost. What about COVID? So basically some sort of bullet points that aren't on this presentation in front of you. The expectation is that if a child wakes up and they're sick, they're kept home. We don't think that every time someone gets the sniffles that they have COVID. However, we're not in the position, given the sort of the crisis that we're going through, to sort of negotiate that at school. Attendance requirements are going to be relaxed, obviously, because we can't say to kids, hey, if you're sick, stay home, and then say, well, you stayed home too many days, so now you don't earn credit in your class. So that attendance policy is going to be put on hold for the time being. No one's going to need to worry about that. What will have to be a concern is getting your work done, and that's part of any sort of attendance policy anyway. So we encourage kids and staff, if they're under the weather, that they stay home until they are symptom-free. So that's part one. There's a long list. If you go online to the Department of Public Health, we'll obviously have our own guidelines too. We'll just probably be copying and pasting them about symptoms where kids or staff should stay home. It's everything from a headache to a stomach ache to nauseous to a fever to chills to all sorts of different things. If your child has any one of those symptoms, when they wake up, they should be kept home until they're symptom-free. That's the safest thing for us. When they're home, let's say if your kid is at home and they have a stomach ache and they're not feeling well, but they're able to do some work, well, then they can do some work. And because of what we're doing with hybrid learning, there's going to be some assignments that they might be able to jump into right away. Teachers are also going to be planning, because they know that because of these sort of restrictions, they know that they can expect that 1 or 2 kids every day is probably not going to be in the classroom. And so we'll probably need to have something ready for them, ready to go when they are home. So we'll talk about, that's another meeting, but we'll get to that part. So that's sort of like a umbrella statement about all this health and safety stuff, is it assumes that parents are keeping their kids home if they're not feeling well. And they're not just like shoving Tylenol down their throat and sending them to school and saying you're going to be okay. I'm going to tell you that you don't want to put the Tylenol in your kid's system and then send them to school, because the side effects of that are going to be more sticky for you. So students so if I'm a student and I'm in class and it just looks like I'm under the weather and I'm coughing and sneezing, whatever, the teacher, we're going to have protocols for this. Those will be clarified, in a future meeting and future guidance, where teachers have sort of an understanding of what will and will not have a student sent to the nurse. So if a student's under the weather, they're sent to the nurse. That student will be sent home immediately. We are being required to set up isolation rooms so that the student can theoretically still do their work while they're waiting for their parent to pick them up. and that's where they'll sit and they'll do their work. That room will be monitored by a staff member, where we're hoping that the parent can pick them up relatively quickly. Once that student is home, they have a choice. This is from Ms. Donovan, who I spoke to today. They can either get tested and show that they have a negative test, or they have to stay home for 10 days and 3 days in a row symptomatic. So that's sort of the health policy from the DPH folks. That's if you are a sick student at school. So that's why I talk about the idea that we don't think that every student who comes in and has a cough has COVID, but because the symptoms mirror COVID, we have to treat it as COVID. So you're better off keeping the kid who normally might have tried to power through. I think about the athletes who are like, aren't feeling 100%, but want to come in because they have practice, because they have a big game the next day. We understand that. It's not ideal, but we understand that it happens. This is the year where it's like, you're not feeling great, you stay home and you do the learning at home for the day. That's going to be much better than having to go through the rigmarole of getting tests and having to stay home for an extended period, because that's the requirements for public health. If you are a student who's in close contact with someone who tests positive, you will be notified and you'll need to be tested or stay out of school for 14 days. Now, one of the side effects of the way we're planning on doing school is that our students will be 6 feet apart. But my understanding, Mr. Friend can correct me if I'm wrong, is if a student is tested positive for COVID in a class, that the kids in that class are notified. That is my belief, the last I heard. But these guys, I'll tell you the story when we get to the end, and that changes regularly as well. In cases, parents are notified if someone's in close contact with a positive case. This is sort of an important point. Just because one student tests positive, or if a staff member tests positive, we will not be shutting down the school. That is not what DESE is telling us to do. DESE is telling us that one test or two tests in and of themselves does not necessarily require to shut down the school. If there are a series of positive tests in a short time span, DPH will consult with the school to determine the next steps. So the example that Ms. Donovan gave was, if 4 kids contract COVID, but then we do some contact tracing, we realize that all 4 of them had a sleepover on Saturday, and that's where they all gave it to each other, then it probably doesn't require us to shut down the school. If 6 members of the senior class and only 2 of them have class together and test positive, then that might be something different. Those are all the things that we just don't know at this time. So I'm going to end this portion with this little story, then I'll get to the questions. I was preparing these 2 slides for the presentation, and I talked to Michelle, Michelle Donovan, our school nurse, on Monday, and I said, can you give me something so I can have some information for the parents and the kids? She said, sure. She gave me some information. I worked up a series of bullet points. On Tuesday, she called me to say, hey, the thing that I just gave you? Yep. She's like, well, it's changed. So don't put those in yet. I'm like, okay. Then I saw her at a meeting on Wednesday with her and Cheryl Lewinsky, and it had changed again. So in the span of 3 days, the health and safety guidelines that we've been given from both the Department of Public Health and DESE changed 3 times in 3 days. So when I say this last end, all health and safety guidelines are subject to change, I really mean that they are subject to change, because apparently they seem to be changing all the time. So our primary focus is health and safety. We're going to err on the side of health and safety, but we know that what we end up doing is we're not creating a sterile environment by any stretch. When you put yourself in a situation where you're in a building with large numbers of people, it's inherently less safe than if you learned at home. But that is sort of the situation that we're in. So I'll take the health and safety questions now.
Okay. Just a comment, the definition of close contact is different from the CDC. There are specific references to prolonged close contact versus in the vicinity of. If they are wearing masks, that is not necessary. So
well, again, I'm going off of what my public health folks have given us, and that your point may be entirely valid. And that's why when I say they're subject to change, they're definitely subject to change. We all remember when 6 feet was 6 feet everywhere, 6 feet everywhere, 6 feet everywhere. And then when we decided that we were going to have all the kids go back to school, all of a sudden 3 feet came into the picture. So things definitely change, and we're going to do the best we can given the information we're providing.
There was a question, what is your screening process going to be? We talked a little bit about that. They're not going to be temperature checks, but I think you covered that as far as looking out for symptoms.
Yeah, there's no screening process when the kids walk in the door. There's no temperature checks. That's not been a reliable indicator of COVID. And so there will be no screening process. Again, the screening process really is at home.
And staff is going to be trained too on what to look out for
correct.
when the kids are in front of them.
Yep, that's one of the things we'll do with stuff.
Yep. Oh man, 6 new messages. Hold on. I'm trying to get to everybody. Will those students who are quarantined for 14 days have access to remote learning?
Yes. So if you're home for 14 days, like as I said to the kids, it's entirely, what we know is that people who have COVID, many of them are asymptomatic. So you could feel completely fine. You just happen to have a disease that is potentially lethal to somebody else. So at home, you are completely fine. You're sitting at home. We definitely want kids engaged in learning. Those kids will have remote learning assignments, and they'll be participating in school the entire time they're ready. And as I said to the kids, but it also could be that they feel kind of crummy and they're not ready for learn. And that's fine too. If they need a couple of days to feel better, or a week, or whatever it is, that's all part of this. So that's why at the beginning when I was talking about attendance, we're not looking at it in the same way, because we know that we're sort of in unprecedented times and we just need to be a little bit more flexible with some of this stuff.
Who will teach a student that is home for 10 to 14 days, Sutton teachers or random remote vendors?
Yeah, so if you're a student who chose to come to Sutton schools, and then you have to go home for 10 to 14 days, a Sutton teacher. So if you're in Sergio Marcucci's AP language class, and then you have to go home for 10 days, Sergio Marcucci will be providing the instruction and the assignments for that class, for that student.
Okay. Is there a decontamination plan for positive cases to ensure that rooms are cleaned better?
Yes. So we're going to get to the cleaning part in a second, but there are some pretty specific guidelines. I didn't get into this. Of what has to happen when a test is a positive case, and the cleaning procedures that go into place. Because of the way that we're managing the students throughout the day, when we get to the schedule, we'll get to that in a minute, and what we have to do. We'll know, for example, if I'm, Timmy, and this is my A block class, and this is my B block class, we'll know exactly where Timmy sat, every classroom that he was in, every space that he was in, because that is what's required in order to go to school. So those spaces will get a different level of cleaning than the typical cleaning that we do every day, which every day we'll be disinfecting the entire school. So there'll be even another level on top of that.
Okay. I know, we'll get these out of the way while we're doing health and safety. Is there going to be hand sanitizer upon entering and exiting every classroom, and will that be mandatory?
Yes, there is. Yes, there will be, unless there's some sort of allergic piece that I'm not aware of. And then, you work with Ms. Donovan on that. Mr. Raymond and I were talking today about how we're going to decontaminate spaces. So if I'm calling Montazari and I have my A block class and I have a bunch of kids and they're all sitting in desks, and then my B block class walks in, they're going to be sitting in the same seat, so we're going to have to find a way to decontaminate between. I know in other schools, basically every kid walks into the class, they get a wipe, they wipe down their area, so that way they're controlling their space, they're cleaning it to make sure that they're safe, and then instruction happens. So those are more specifics that we'll have more information on when we know exactly, are we dealing with 387 kids coming in the door in the fall? Are we dealing with 350 kids? Obviously, that's all going to determine how many Clorox wipes we have and hand sanitizer we have, but we have been obviously buying that kind of thing since the spring.
And then just a question, how will mask wearing be enforced?
Excellent question. I think that's our next slide.
Yeah.
So is that the last one?
And I want to just reassure everybody, there's a lot of questions that may be answered when we get to the models of the schedule. So I'm just trying to kind of clump things together so we can circle back and get those questions answered if they're not answered through the presentation.
Yep. And if we miss a question, if I miss a question, feel free to just either re-put it in the chat or, chime in, entirely. I know I have a lovely voice, but you might want to hear someone else's voice other than me and Ann through the course of the next hour. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. All right. So to your point about masks. So here are some things to consider about school for next year. No students will be allowed in the building before 7:20. So we'll be adjusting the buses and when they arrive at school so that no buses arriving to school before 7:20. Teachers are not required to be in their classroom before 7:20, so we can't have kids in the building. If you're a high school student, traditionally what happens is if you get to school early, you kind of plop down in the hallway, you talk to your friends, you might go check in with your teachers, you might run down to the office, you might go see Miss Tamala about athletics. You kind of like have some time in the morning to manage yourself. That is not going to happen. So what's going to happen now when students arrive, whether they are dropped off by their parent, they dropped off by the bus, or they drive to school themselves, they are going from the vehicle in the door, we'll talk about that stuff in a second, directly to their A block class. Again, we are required to know as close to as possible where all students are at all times. So we can't have the kids kind of lounging around in the hallway, which unfortunately is some of the stuff that they like because they get to be social with their friends, but that's not going to be allowed. So they'll go from their car, from the bus to their classroom, their A block class. All students and staff must wear a mask all day unless eating or taking a mask break. We'll talk about mask breaks a little bit later on. That's a requirement from the state. This is a non-negotiable. I'm not going to be having conversations about why it's my right not to wear a mask. If you feel that way, I understand your point of view. I might not agree with it, but then I would say that remote learning is where you'll feel more comfortable. It's not going to be an option. And at the high school level, we're not going to be having like this back and forth with kids about, oh no, scratching my nose, things the kids can do. I can only imagine, I thank God that my kids are out of high school at this point. So it's a requirement that they have the masks on all day unless they're eating or taking a mask break. And that's for all students and all staff. We have time factored in to allow to clean and disinfect between transitions. When we go to the daily schedule, we'll talk about that. We do have mask breaks. Again, that'll be part of the daily schedule conversation. You'll see where those occur. So there will be time during the school day where kids can get outside or in a large space and take their mask off. But it's just not going to happen when they're in close contact or in the vicinity of other students or staff. So that's going to happen outside or in a larger area. Students will have assigned seats in all classes and lunch. It's not negotiable. So wherever the teacher sets you up on day one of class, that's where you're going to live for the remainder of the year. The reason for that is, again, for contact tracing. So we need to know where people are and where they sat and how close they were to folks, so that if there is a positive outbreak in a class, we know exactly who is 6 feet away, who is 12 feet away, and people have that information. Same goes for lunch. So obviously lunch is a time when kids are social, and they want to talk to their friends, and we understand that. So we'll definitely do some sort of finagling with lunch. But in the past, we've had one lunch where all 387 kids are all eating in the cafeteria at one time. In the new schedule that I'm going to show in a second, we have 3 lunches. So you definitely won't be eating with all the kids at once. And our reopening committee is still working on the logistics of actually where and how lunch will happen. So there are some schools where lunch is happening in the classroom. So you kind of the period ends, and then you just take out your lunch and you eat right there. There's problems with that because then you're eating in a space that a teacher then has to teach in, and your mask is off and a bunch of kids breathing all in one space that's like smaller. There's models that I know that some schools are going with where kids who bring their lunch, eat in the classroom, kids who are buying lunch, eat in the cafeteria or some sort of like larger outdoor space. We are investigating the idea of getting tents so that there's some more outside spaces. That hasn't been decided yet, but that's probably likely to happen. But then we're also talking about kids eating in the cafeteria or in the gym or in the small gym, or maybe even the auditorium if needed, depending on what the situation is. But that's all those kind of like specifics and nitty gritty will be hammered out later on. But wherever you end up sitting for lunch, where you get assigned is where you sit, and that's that. So that's lunch. Students, as I mentioned, when we talked about arrival in the morning, there'll be staggered arrival and departure times. So arrival time will be between 7:20 and 7:50. First period is going to start at 7:50. That's going to allow us to have the buses come in at a staggered way. Have parents dropping off their kids in a staggered manner, and then our student drivers can also come in at a different time. So again, we're not trying to get all of the people into the building all at once. And then finally, all students are out of the building by 2:05, no exceptions. Again, typically what happens at the end of the day, kids, the last bell rings, they're chatting with their teammates, they're hanging out with friends, they're getting extra help. But that's all sort of uncontrolled space that we can't really provide. Again, the goal is that we're trying to create sort of identifiable cohorts of kids that we can track and trace throughout the building, throughout the day. And obviously, if we have kids going here, there, and everywhere, we really can't keep track of that. So when the bell rings, when you're dismissed, you're going from your last period class, you're going from there to out the door, and that's your day. So those are some of the considerations for what we have to do to keep our kids safe and our staff safe for the school, for what a typical school day will look like. Anne, you want to chime in?
There's a question, will siblings be allowed to arrive and depart together?
Yes.
Same stagger time.
We're going to get to that one in a second.
Yep. Just trying to stick with
For sure.
How are kids going to social distance on the bus?
There are guidelines that you can look up on what the bus configurations are. Again, when the district puts out its final plans, I'm sure that'll be part of it. But I think it's like every other seat, or it's not every other seat. It's like if I'm sitting on the left-hand side, then I'm on the right-hand side and the seat behind, and it's kind of like a zigzag as you go through the bus. And masks are required the entire time on the bus, and the windows will be open. All the windows will be open on the bus throughout the duration of the trip, is my understanding, per DESE guidance.
Is a face shield allowed as an alternative to a mask?
That's a great question, Anne. Make sure you write that one down.
Okay.
The answer to that question is no.
Oh, thank you, Mr.
They
Friend.
need to have a mask or a gaiter.
Unless you have, you can have a face shield, but you have to have like something attached to the face shield to cover the neck. And if you have that, you can wear the mask with, it's like an apron under your mask.
A gaiter.
Yep.
A gaiter. Thank you, a gaiter.
Thank you, Mr. Friend and Mr. Whittier.
Is there a better way to limit transitions during the day for students? We're about to get to the answer to that question in one moment.
Yes, we are.
And then let me just see if there's any, that's a hybrid model. So each child gets assigned a seat for lunch, and that's that. Is this for the entire year, or if COVID calms down, will this change?
Yeah, so like we said, like all of this is subject to change pending public health guidance. So if public health says, hey, if you kids can switch their seats once a month at lunch as long as you know where everybody is, then sure. But it's all going to be reasonable and able for us to manage. So that's the part where we just need to work out. We need to work out the specifics. If the vaccine comes and COVID just magically goes away, in February, then I imagine we'll be doing school a lot differently for the spring, and God knows that's my hope. But given what we know right now, this is the way we're proceeding until told otherwise. Yes, would be a good way to look at it.
Okay. Will students have to secure their own art supplies if they are enrolled in an art course?
That is a question that we're going to have to come up with an answer for. I'll have to contact Ms. Craig and Mr. Friend, and we'll get back to you on that question. That question also came up with the kids, and we don't have the answer to that one quite yet.
Will students be allowed to use their lockers?
That's another good question. Kids ask that one as well. We're going to highly discourage locker use. Why are you discouraging locker use? Well, because if I'm in a locker and we're trying to transition kids without clustering them, if we have 5, 10, 15 kids at lockers while people are trying to get by them, they obviously create congestion, and that can be problematic. So if you definitely need to use a locker, then we'll have a process for that. My hope is that we can do that in a way that's sort of spaced, where kids can, one kid is at locker 1, and maybe the next locker is 6 feet away, it's locker 7, and then we do every 7 lockers with up and down, and then opposite kids, depending on what day of school you're going to. I know the state, I think, is deterring locker use.
When you stagger start times, are the kids assigned a time in that 30 minutes that they need to be in by?
We're going to get to the specifics on that in a second, we're not going to get to specifics. We're going to talk about that in a second, but I don't think it's reasonable to say, well, if your last name begins with a B, you must be at school at 7:27. I don't think that's rational or doable for parents. It certainly wouldn't have been for me. We're going to talk a little bit about how arrival time will go, and one of the reasons that we're looking to go at a hybrid model is that if you just take away half the kids arriving to school at any one day, then the staggering becomes a lot more manageable, and then you'll have some natural staggering points as well. So we'll get to that when we get to the schedule.
Can kids have some ability to request who they sit with at lunch if we're sending them back for socialization? That's just something we might want to think about. So.
Yep, they'll have. We talked about that with the kids, but the hiccup for the kids is going to be that they're used to having the entire school at one lunch, and so then it didn't matter if my friends weren't in the same class with me the period before or the period after. We knew that we're all going to be in the same lunch. We're obviously not going to be doing lunch like that. So in the model that we're going to talk about, that we're proposing, there are actually 3 lunches. And so if you have, let's just make it our lives easy. Let's say we have 300 kids come in the door in the fall, and we say 87 folks decide to stay with remote learning. So if we have 300 kids, only 150 of those kids would be in the school any one day. And so 150 divided by 3, so then you'd only have 50 kids at any one particular lunch. Again, we're trying to minimize the chance of infection, minimize risk as much as we possibly can. So we're trying to keep the numbers small. So if we're going to know that we're going to have about 50 kids at any one lunch, the chances of you having your friend at that lunch, it's just all going to be, hit or miss.
Just a comment, Universal Plastics in Sutton is making the shields with the bibs, and Lisa Conley said she could send pictures.
Great.
Have we considered a half-day schedule?
I can tell you that that's my current, now one option was to have the kids come into school, do all of their classes, and then be sent home before lunch. And then if you needed a lunch, you could grab a lunch on the way out the door. I do not believe that schedule is getting much traction currently.
Okay. Will you be leaving the doors open so that all the students won't be touching the doors or handles outside and inside?
The classroom doors per the state are required to be left open, as are the windows. Again, this will be problematic and challenging in November. I imagine Mr. Friend will probably have to write this one down, like the custodians will sort of open the doors in the morning so that kids aren't touching them. Obviously, there's some safety concerns to consider as well. So we just can't have the doors just, blocked open all day long for anybody to come and go as they please. But at those high transition points, we're going to talk about mask breaks in a minute. That's when doors might be propped open. There might be a staff member there to make sure that kids and staff are the ones coming in the building and not unwanted visitors.
Okay. We're going to address this in a second. Will the alphabet be used to determine what days the students attend? Do you want to just speak to that before we get into the schedule?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is most probably that is what's going to happen. So again, using my example of 300 kids decide they want to opt for in-person learning in Sutton, we're just going to draw a line. 150 are going to be in Group A, and 150 are going to be in Group B. The only way to do that equitably is to just use the alphabet. We can't have situations where kids are trying to I'll trade you these 3 kids in this group for these 3 kids in that group. That's not going to happen. So once we know in April 10th, I believe, you'll be
August.
August
10th.
April 10th, that'd be a longer year. August 10th, you'll get a survey, and at which point, that's the point where you're going to have to decide whether or not you're sending a student to school or they're going to stay home remote. And once we have those numbers, then we can tell folks, okay, here's who's in school, here's where the line's going to be. That's how we have to do it. Otherwise.
And yes, we will absolutely consider siblings across all schools when making those groups.
Yep. So that's one of the reasons why we want to have these meetings this week, is so we can hear from you all, and then we'll get to the hybrid models a little bit later on, so that we can settle on one, so that like the high school can't be doing one group is Monday, Tuesday, one group is Thursday, Friday, and then the early learning center is every other day. So we kind of have to settle on something that works for all 4 schools, and which makes it even more challenging, because we're trying to be respectful of parents' daycare needs, and sort of transporting kids to and from school.
Have there been any thoughts on polling the community about splitting the kids alphabetical or by grade?
By grade won't work for the health and safety reasons that we outlined. So for example, if I have the entire sophomore class in, well, now I have a U.S. history class with 27 kids, and now we're 3 feet apart. And that's not safe as we've determined it. We're not really looking at 3 feet as a safe distance. We're sticking with 6 feet. My understanding is that most districts in the Commonwealth are actually looking at 6 feet. So that's what we're going to. And so if you put all kids in one grade in at one time, then the classes inevitably are bigger. And that becomes more problematic and more risky for the teacher and the students in that particular class.
Okay, and if students have to leave by 2:05, how do they stagger leave times on the buses and such?
We'll get to that.
Okay, on
All
to the schedule.
All right, on to the schedule. Okay, so what we are proposing is a change in our schedule for just this year to a 4x4 block schedule. And there's a reason that we, along with, actually, I've had conversations now with several other principals, and they are also considering changing to a 4x4 block schedule. Why a 4x4 block schedule? So for those of you who are not in schools, right now our students take 7 classes, and each one of them drops every day. So kids essentially take 6 classes a day, and actually in our schedule they take 7 classes a day because we have advisory built into every day. So that's a lot of transitions. That's a lot of classes that they're managing all at once. So in a 4x4 block schedule, instead of taking 7 full year classes or some full year classes and some half year classes, kids would take 4 classes one semester and 4 classes the second semester. All of those classes would be 1 credit. And so instead of taking math from September to June, you might take math from December to June. You would have longer periods of time in the math class to make up for the fact that you didn't take it in the spring, in the fall, and that would be your year's credits of math. Similarly, maybe you're enrolled in AP Biology, and AP Biology happens from September to December. And so you would take your AP Biology class then, and then when December rolls and it's time to switch to second semester, you're done with AP Biology, you then are taking a second class. There's going to be a graph in a second that'll show you how this will look in real time. But let me get through these bullet points, and then we can kind of show the 2 versions of the schedule and why we think one is a lot healthier than the other. So we believe that the 4x4 block schedule is the healthiest schedule possible given the health restraints that we're all kind of facing. We're also mindful of remote learning and the fact that we are probably going to end up back at home at some point. So there are fewer courses for students to focus on at one time and fewer courses for teachers to focus on at one time. So again, instead of managing 7 classes in a day, as a student, you're only managing 4 classes a day as a student. As a teacher, you're only having to focus on, let's say I'm Dennis Stamos, and I teach all the juniors history. So I have the entire junior class. So I think the junior class is 97 kids. Let's just round it up to 100 to make our lives easier. So instead of having to worry about giving feedback and support for 100 kids, doing it both ways, you only have to worry about 50 kids at a time. One of the things that we heard when we polled the community, the kids and the teachers when we did remote learning last year was that the teachers were looking to give more meaningful feedback to the kids were looking for more in-depth feedback, and parents are looking for more in-depth feedback. That only happens if we're asking teachers to do less and not more. So by reducing the amount of kids that the teachers are working with at any one time, that gives them more time to give quality feedback and quality work with the kids that they do have, instead of spreading that attention over 100 kids. They're able to focus on 50. There's obviously a health and safety component to a 4x4 block schedule, which is instead of transitioning 8 or 9 times during the day, if you think about a typical school day where we have it, now they're only transitioning 4 times. So they're walking in the door, they're going to A block, they're going to B block, they're going to C block, they're going to D block, and then they're out the door. That's different than A block, in the door to A block to B block to advisory to C block. You can follow my logic. There's a lot of transitions, there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of places where kids are, a lot of tracking and tracing that we'd have to do. And that can be problematic from a health and safety perspective. I can tell you that the health folks are much happier with a block schedule than they are with a 7 drop 1 schedule. 7 transitions in a day is really problematic. The other nice thing about this schedule is that it's consistent. There's no drops, so the kid has A block, B block, C block, and D block every single day. He doesn't have to worry about, is this a day where I dropped my B block or my A block? Nope. Every single day, you see the same 4 classes for a semester. And then the other reason that we like this model as a sort of a way to kind of go into this year is it works for us if we're all back in the building. So if the waters part and there's a vaccine and we're all back in the building in February, we can do this schedule as a full school and it works. If we're in hybrid for the majority of the year, the schedule works. If we shift to remote learning, the schedule works. Now, if we're in remote learning, a student only has to worry about 4 classes that they have to manage, not 7. A teacher only has to worry about 3 classes, not 5. So the idea that we're dealing with a global pandemic, we have a lot of situations that are being put on our kids and our staff that have not been done before. And so we're trying to do more with less rather than less with more. So that's that's the sort of the thinking that went into the why a block schedule. So here's a typical.
Mr. McCarthy, before you move on, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just to clarify, there's a question in the chat about what happens to the extra teachers.
There are no extra teachers. So we'll show you that in a second when we go to these schedules. Teachers are actually teaching more classes in this model instead of fewer.
And can you just speak a little bit more to AP classes? There's a lot of comments about just the gap. If the kids, have the class in the first semester and they don't take the test till the end of the year, can you just speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. So let's let me get to the schedule and then we'll talk.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So this would be a typical schedule for one of our sophomores now. Just as a sophomore, it takes mainly honors courses. These are. No. Okay. So these are the courses. Sorry, dog break right there. So these are courses that the student would take: an honors English class, an honors math class, Spanish, et cetera, et cetera. You can see down the end in his two elective blocks. He took public speaking semester 1 and painting semester 2, financial wellness semester 1, and drawing semester 2. So he has a total of 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 classes that he would be managing in the traditional schedule. In the block schedule, he still gets those classes, just a little bit differently. So he's still taking biology honors, geometry honors, English 10 honors. But the electives are now half-year courses. So painting and drawing, which actually were Art 2 before we decided to make it 2 different electives, is now just a semester-long course. He still takes public speaking. He takes financial wellness. And we're also going to say that if kids want to take an SPP, this would, or a guided study, if this would go for any kid, we're hoping to have this happen, that they could opt for that. Because they have the ability to take 8 courses instead of 7, they're not going to be behind on credits. They'll be fine to graduate on time. And in fact, if they take that 8th course, they'll actually be ahead of the credit game. But what this does is it obviously minimizes the way that kids are moving through. So this is considerations for students. Each semester course is 1 full year course. So again, you would take math the first half of the year, but you would not take it the second half of the year. You would take Spanish the second half of the year, but not the first half of the year. You'd be taking 8 classes instead of 7. 9th and 10th graders, we're hopeful to be able to have them take a study if needed to manage their course load. Seniors, our internship program has obviously been a really big part of our school over the past several years. That kind of got whacked pretty significantly in the spring. We're hopeful to have some version of the internship program in the spring this year, but obviously that's going to depend on health and safety guidelines and businesses' willingness to take on students. Last year, what we did is we piloted a sort of a digital capstone project. If we're not able to do the internship program, we'll be moving in that direction. So seniors still get some sort of different experience at the end of their senior year, but something that's meaningful that they can take with them. And then finally, with the schedule, all classes that students originally signed up for are available. Bandit course, we'll talk about that in a second. But there might be conflicts, like in any schedule. So if I go back, it could be that maybe this Art 2, when the student wanted C block, public speaking first semester also happened there, and the student would have to choose. What we talk about with kids all the time is that that's part of getting older. Sometimes you have to make choices. You can't always have everything that you want. And so the students will have to choose because there are conflicts in any schedule. And that's a decision folks will make. But all of the courses that the kids signed up for in general will all be there. Some of them might be a little different, like Art 2 is a good example of a class that was going to be drawing and painting, and now we're just going to make it Art 2. Graphic Design 2 was going to be 3D graphics and 2D graphics. Now it's just going to be Graphic Design 2. So students who sign up for those courses still get that material, just going to be formatted a little bit differently. Band and chorus, like we talked about, the guidance right now is that they won't be able to sing or play their instrument inside. So we're working with the music department. Do we offer some sort of music appreciation course? Maybe. But kids who are expecting to play their instrument during the school day, that's not going to happen. Same goes with phys ed. There's some guidance around that we're looking into as well. But if people are expecting the typical, basketball during phys ed time, that's obviously not going to happen. Folks, somebody asked about AP. So here's a typical schedule for teachers. So this is just Ms. Fleming's class. So typically a teacher would teach 5 classes, not 6. But you can see that Ms. Fleming's actually teaching 1 class more. The reason we're doing that is what we're going to do is within the classes that teachers have a lot of kids. So like, for example, with Ms. Fleming, she has biology honors. She had, I forget exactly how many kids. I want to say it's like 50 in those 2 sections of biology honors. We'd rather have those 50 kids split between 3 sections of biology honors rather than 2 sections of biology honors. That makes for a safer environment for everybody involved. Forensics is her elective. That happens in both semesters. And AP biology happens only in semester 2. So there are going to be some AP courses that happen in first semester and don't happen in second semester, and vice versa. There are many schools in Massachusetts that have the block schedule, and this is just part of what they do. There are some that just there's no way around that particular situation. Some schools make carve-outs. Like I know there's some schools have like AP Bio and Chem. Sometimes they like those are over 2 semesters, but AP US History does not get that same sort of consideration. I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe it's the labs. I'm not sure. But either way, what we would do for classes that happen in the fall but then don't happen in the spring. So let's say you were in US History. Let's pick that one as an example. You had US History 2, AP US History in the spring. In the fall. And then the test is in the spring. We would be creating some sort of test prep program for kids in the spring before the exam, so they could bone up on what they did in the fall before they take the exam. It is unfortunately one of the sort of casualties of COVID that when trying to make a healthier schedule, we can't keep everything that we want in place. And this kind of falls in the same category as band and chorus and phys ed. It's not going to look exactly the same. It just can't by definition. So, question.
Okay, thank you. Let me see.
105 questions?
Yeah. There was just to clarify that if kids are in band and chorus and say we make an alternative music appreciation class or something, if that's something that students are not interested in taking, they can sign up for another elective, correct?
Of course.
Okay, that was one of the questions in the chat. And then is there going to be advisory?
There's not going to be advisory, unfortunately. And I'm a big proponent of advisory, and advisory was a huge hit with the kids and the staff last year at the high school. We found it incredibly valuable. We just don't have the time. And it just comes down to that. We're going to get into the daily schedule in a second. But the state's requiring us to have mask breaks. We need to stagger our entrance and exit into the school, and we just can't fit everything in. In addition, we have kids, if we go to the hybrid model, they're learning at home 3 days a week. So advisory is not going to happen. We will have opportunities for extra help, and I know some of the clubs met during advisory and things like that. We'll have to work around that piece, but advisory is sort of a half an hour. Kids just can kind of do what they want with that time. That's not going to be back next year, which kills me, but it has to happen.
Mr. McCarthy, can you speak to tutorials and how will students that need academic support get those supports that they need?
Yep. So the state has made it pretty clear that if you're a student with a learning plan, whether it's an IEP, a 504, or ELL learner, and you have a learning plan that's sort of guiding your work, the teams have a pretty strong say in where and when those services happen. For student, the vast majority, there are some students in Ms. Bjork's room. Those are obviously students who require a different level of support. The kids who are in in more mainstream classes with sort of low-level supports, who might have just like a tutorial as one of their classes, that tutorial will happen. And then the team will decide whether or not they want to have tutorial happen both semesters or only one semester. So again, the nice thing about the block schedule is because the kids actually get a quote-unquote an extra class, the student can take tutorial in each semester and not be hurt. They can still have their 6 classes that they were going to take along with the tutorial. They would just get it both semesters. So all of those questions, I actually have a meeting with our new special ed director on Wednesday with Mr. Parker. But those questions are always made at the team level, and then they inform what we do. So that's how those supports will happen.
Okay, there's a lot here, but not on topic. So,
all right. Well,
some of them are coming up.
All right. So here's just another slide about just sort of the benefits or sort of considerations for the block schedule. A couple things. If for some reason a student wasn't able to take financial wellness, let's just say that's a graduation requirement because of what's happening this year, and when they're a senior, they still couldn't fit it in. We're not going to hold them against that. There are some things we don't have a lot of wiggle room on. English 4 years and U.S. history, but other than that, we'll be able to be flexible with graduation requirements if it is actually a legitimate conflict that we can't work around. So people should feel easy about that. What we're not getting into today are those specific remote learning plan expectations, the specific details about COVID protocols. Athletics, we just have no information, and bus routes, all that stuff. We just don't have that information right now. I can give you a little preview of remote learning, which is that remote learning will be very different next year than it was this past year. There will be grades, there will be assignments, there will be tests. Kids will be getting new material from the beginning. Like I said to the kids today, it's going to be school as they know it, and all but the fact of where they're actually going to be doing the work. So that is a shift that some of our kids who might not have been fully engaged with remote learning last year, one of the things that we were telling folks last year is to stay connected to school with remote learning, because we would be coming back and there was a chance that we'd be going back to remote learning again. We wanted kids to develop that muscle memory. And the nice thing was that we had about 80% of our kids doing all of the assignments every week. So remote learning, when the teacher's having a Zoom class, the screen's going to be on, the kids are going to be able to, it's going to be face-to-face, that kind of stuff. So it's going to be different, but we'll get into that in another meeting further down the line. But we're not talking about that here because really we're focusing on what we're planning on. Is the assumption going in right now is that we're going to be walking in the door with physical bodies at some point in September when we have the first day of school set.
That's funny because someone just asked, do you know when we should be starting school? Which is a great question.
It's a great question. We don't have that answer. The state, the rumor on the street is that the state and sort of agreed to 170 days of instruction this year instead of 180 days of instruction this year.
So I just received an email as you're talking, and the state has waived the 180-day rule. They're instituting a 170-day rule to allow us to have plenty of time to prepare. I have a school committee this evening, and I'll be talking to the school committee about this, but our initial thought is that we would start school probably right after Labor Day at this point, but that could change as well. Because we don't want to wait too late into September. We want to try to get the students back as soon as possible, but we want to have plenty of time to make sure that our staff are ready to go, that we've trained our staff on procedures, on safety procedures and health-related issues before we bring the students back into the building.
Good timing, Mr. Firm, with that email.
All right. We have a lot of questions here too about remote learning and switching back and forth between the remote and hybrid model. So I just want to make you aware of that before you go ahead.
Okay.
A suggestion to make a web page with links to the presentation, comments, questions and answers, any urgent updates.
Yeah,
so
that's a
nice suggestion.
Yeah, that we can do that. I did remember to record this. It's been my Zoom Achilles heel lately, but so we'll be sharing it on the Facebook page, and then we should have and maybe me and you can make like a FAQ page for all these questions.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So the next slide is actually the daily schedule. So what will your kid experience when they walk in the door? So as you can see, the arrival time is from 7:20 to 7:50. Class starts at 7:50. So people have questions about like, well, how are we going to stagger arrival? So we'll be working with the bus companies, and we'll be working with the people who are dropping their kids off and with the student drivers to sort of target different times. Again, remembering that we're only bringing 175 kids in the building every day. That's obviously substantially different than 387. So it's healthier just from that point of view. So like, let's say 2 buses arrive at the same time. The bus that arrives first, that will unload first. The kids will all be walking in the door in one place. The hallways are all going to be one way. And then the kids will go in their one-way hallway, and they'll go to their first period class where they'll sit and wait for instruction to begin. So if they arrive at class at 7:20, then they're sitting for about a half an hour. And that's just going to be the way that it is. Again, as I mentioned, typically when kids arrive early, sometimes buses will let off as early as 6:55. The kids are usually just sitting on the floor of the hallway, either doing homework, listening to their iPod, something like that. So that will happen in class before instruction starts. So then there's a 75-minute block for A block. So the class will go from again, the times are approximate. We're working on finalizing the times, but we had to start with something. So this is what we're starting with. There's still obviously room for negotiation on all this stuff. Mr. Friend might say, oh, the buses can't get there till 7:25, but then we would adjust things accordingly. A block would happen, it's a block. So then the bell rings, then there's their first mask break. So again, the minute a student walks in the door, the expectation and the rule is going to be that the mask is on. The mask stays on the entire time from 7:20 to 9:05. At 9:05, the bell rings, and we'll have a system to dismiss people in a staggered fashion. And if I'm a student and I'm going to go from my A block to my B block, I'm not going to go directly to my B block class. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk, and depending on where I am, I'm actually going to walk outside, and that's where I'll take my mask break. We'll have staff outside to monitor kids, make sure they're maintaining 6 feet of distance, and then that's where kids can get a break between period A and period B, period B and period C, and they can get that mask break in right there. That's why we had to, like we mentioned, advisory. That's where we had to increase the passing time. Obviously, if we're going to be sending kids out of the building in various locations to get their mask break, it's going to take a little bit longer. In inclement weather, do they have to go outside? No. In those instances, we'll probably be using the gym, the cafeteria, the small gym, the auditorium, larger open spaces to take the mask break if students want. If students are uncomfortable taking a mask break, they certainly do not have to take one. It's very possible for you to go the entire day without taking a mask break. It's not fun, but doctors do it every day. So it is possible. So that's where the mask break occurs. It happens between the periods. Again, so you can see the day is a little bit simpler in this model. They go from A block to B block. They take another mask break. C block, there are 3 lunches, and everyone gets a 30-minute lunch. Again, we're kind of working out the logistics of how lunch is actually going to break down. Again, we need to know how many kids are going to be in the building. But once we know who's going to be in the building, then we can put kids in spaces 6 feet apart, facing in the same direction, so that they're not breathing on each other, and that's how lunch will operate. After lunch, there's a mask break, then they go to D block, and then class ends at 1:50, and then we have to build in dismissal time. So at 1:50, we might say something like, okay, bus 3 is here. If you're on bus 3, you're dismissed. And then we wait, and then we might say, student drivers, you and your siblings are dismissed. So the seniors who are driving are all dismissed. And that's how we would naturally stagger transitions out of the building through the day, so that we're not having the entire building trying to get out the back door at 2 o'clock. And then again, at 2:05, the doors are locked, everybody's outside, and students will need to be picked up and off the school grounds by 2:05 at the latest. I think that brings us to hybrid. So questions on any schedule-related questions?
I just answered one about arrival. What are kids doing during lunch but not their lunch period? Could you just explain C block again?
Sure. So C block is a class. So let's pretend, let's pick a 9th grader. So I'm a 9th grader and I go to Mr. Perrin's world history class, A block. Then I go to Mr. Stone's intro to physics class, B block. And then C block is my English class with Mr. Loss. So depending on what class you're in, and again, this is why we need to know who's coming in the building so we know which lunch everyone has. You might go to the first lunch, so you might go from B block directly to lunch, or you might go to C block and then either have second lunch or third lunch. So you might have C block, have a little bit of C block, about a half an hour, and then the bell will ring, and then you go to lunch in the middle of your C block class, eat, and then come back to C block class. Or you might go from B block to C block, go all the way through C block, and have lunch at 11:57. So there are 3 different spots where we're breaking the kids up to create, the fewest amount of kids in any one spot that we can, and sort of maintain sort of a working schedule.
Okay. Yeah, I think the other ones are hybrid, curriculum. There is actually a question and comment, is our cleaning time realistic? Most disinfectants have a required wet time of up to 10 minutes to be effective. So just something to factor in.
Well, we're working with DPH and with Mr. Raymond to do the best we can. Again, we're not purporting to create a sterile environment. We're going to create the safest environment we possibly can while having 150 kids and 45 staff in one space every single day. And so that's just sort of the reality of what we're being asked to do. There's no version of this where we are going to guarantee everything's going to be sterile because we just know that we can't do it. But we're just going to try to do the best job we possibly can given the restraints that we have.
One more question in that same vein. Are open windows and doors to compensate for possible inefficiencies in the ventilation system?
Well, the ventilation system is not recycled air. It's fresh air that comes into the building. So that's one. But the kicker is that the state is requiring all doors and windows to be open. So Mr. Raymond every year tells the teachers to keep their doors and windows closed when it gets hot, because that's how it actually, the cooled, refreshed air gets through into the building. But in this instance, actually, the doors and windows are going to be open. So my understanding is that the refreshed air is going to be on all night long to kind of cool the building down as much as we can when it's hot outside in the summer, and then shut it off when at whatever 6:30, and then the windows and doors will be open because that's actually a state mandate.
Okay.
Good.
Windows open in the winter. That's one of our questions, especially on the bus.
Windows open. I have not seen anything that said when the weather gets closed. When the weather gets cold, you can close the windows. That's what they're telling us that we have to do.
All right.
You good?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so as we mentioned, we're looking mostly at a hybrid model. Again, a hybrid model would be that part of the kids, half the kids come at one portion of a week or a day or period of days, and the other half come a different day, with the goal being that we don't have the 100% of the kids in the building at any one time. So that's really where we're focusing our attention, and that's where we've done the most work as far as negotiating schedules and staggered arrivals and all that kind of stuff. So what we have not settled on, because we are in negotiation with the other 3 schools in the district, is what that exactly is going to look like. So I'm presenting some here, and then I'm actually going to give you a poll, and you guys are going to be the first people to kind of weigh in on what you think would be the best model, knowing that I'm not saying that everyone votes for one model. It's definitely going to be the winner, because we're only 1 school out of 4, and although we're the best school, that's what I like to think, we do need to listen to the other schools too. So I'm going to share the couple models with you, and then you guys will have a chance to weigh in. So here we go. So this is one version of hybrid. In this version, we have one group of kids, and let's call them just Group A for ease. They come to school on Monday and Tuesday all the time. There are a couple of days with a Monday holiday. On those days, we would have those kids come to school on a Wednesday, and we would have the custodian stay later on a Wednesday night to clean before the Group B comes in. But basically, except for 2 different days, every Monday, every Tuesday, the same group of kids walks through the door on Monday and Tuesday. On Wednesday, everyone's out of the building, except for the teachers, where we're doing a deep clean of the building after the teachers leave. Teachers are doing remote learning lessons with the kids during the day for all the kids. And then the teachers leave, the custodians clean and disinfect so that the Group A sort of contaminants are out of the system and out of the building by Wednesday. On Thursday, Group B walks in the door. They do Thursday and Friday. The custodians do their magic on Friday and Saturday. They clean it. And so when Group A walks in the door again on Monday and Tuesday, they have a clean building. In almost every model of schools that I've seen, their schools are building in this remote learning cleaning day somewhere into their schedule. We're not different that way. The principals that I've been in contact with, almost all of them have Wednesdays being the day, because most of them are looking at this sort of 1 group, 2 group kind of thing. And that obviously allows you to clean between one group of people and the second group of people before they walk in the next day. So that's one option of hybrid. So that's sort of the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday version. The second version, which is not currently in line, it's not. I would not say it's a fan favorite. Is you see one group of kids for a full week with a remote and a cleaning day, and then you see the second group the next week, and then you just keep doing that. You're in one week, you're out the next week. I don't think anyone likes the idea of kids being home for a week all by themselves. That's why it's really not the version that's getting a lot of traction. But it is one of the, I know some schools are considering it. So it is something that we've talked about, but it's not getting a lot of traction.
Mr. McCarthy, I have a question. If the student is in the A group and is in school, what are they doing when they're home on the remote learning days and when the B group is in school? So if your student is not in school, what are they doing the other days? Are they going to scheduled classes? Are they doing independent work? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to get to it right now. So
okay, perfect.
And so the last.
Hybrid 3. Sorry.
Well, no, it's okay because it just doesn't. It's not necessarily intuitive. So the last option is you're in every other day. So Group A kids would be in it on Monday, then on Thursday, and then Group B would be on Tuesday and on Friday. And the benefit of that is that you're seeing the kids spaced out over a week, and you're not going 3 days in a row with missing the kids. The downfall of that is it's hard to build instructional consistency because you're seeing the kids on Monday, then you have 2 days off, then you're seeing them on Thursday, then you have 2 days off. So that's problematic. But there are benefits and drawbacks to all of them. The important thing to know about all of these models, and it does not matter which, and I'm going to go back to this one because I think it's the simplest. If I'm an A student and I'm in school on Monday and Tuesday, I'm still in school on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I'm not going to be in the building on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, but my teachers are going to have prepared work for me. I'm going to have assignments to do, videos to watch, group work to participate in, the whole kit and caboodle. So when I said earlier about like in the spring, we were doing ungraded and there were no tests and all that stuff, that is not going to be the case in any version of school this fall. So I might have, I'm just going to pick on that 9th grader again. I'm in Mr. Perrin's class and I see him Monday and Tuesday. And then when I leave him on Tuesday, he's going to say, okay, over the next 3 days, here's your assignment. Watch this video, complete this group project, post on our classroom page, respond to some of your classmates' comments. He's going to provide work for the students while they're away. Because obviously Mr. Perrin can't be Zooming with the kids in Group A if he's now teaching the kids in Group B who are now in school, right? And we can't have video broadcasts of school because then that's a FERPA violation where you're broadcasting private information on the internet, and that's not viable as far as I've been told. No one's told me that it is viable. So the work that students are doing on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday is more independent. However, on the remote day, teachers have that day to check in with individual students. They might be doing a full, like a sort of a shortened class on Wednesday where, so for example, in this example that I just shared, I was in Group A in Mr. Perrin's class in his A block World History class. There's also students who are in Group B who are in his A block World History class. We might both be in the remote class on Wednesday for a shortened class period where teachers are providing direct instruction to the whole class at once. That's the stuff that we haven't worked out exactly yet because we need to know what version of this we're doing before we can talk about exactly what remote learning is going to look like when the students are home by themselves. But the message that the adults need to sort of drive home to the kids and that the kids need to internalize is that you go to school 5 days a week and you should be working a significant amount of the time, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, even if you're getting up a little bit later because, hey, that's a benefit of this sort of the model is that you don't have to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning. You can get up at 9 o'clock in the morning, but you still have to do all of your work throughout the day. And assignments will be due on Friday and or whenever the teacher says, and if they're not completed, then you're going to fail it or get a poor grade or whatever it is you do. That's part of what this whole process is. So that's what remote learning looks like in this hybrid model. If we're full remote, which we're not going to talk about right now because that's not what we're looking at right now, that would be something different. And then the reopening committee hasn't really discussed what that would look like yet. But again, it would be a much more structured version of school. It would not be sort of the students, for example, attendance would be required for remote learning. Kids would have to turn on their video screen so I could see that you're there and paying attention. If we're giving a test, the teacher might have the student, put the camera like that so I can see the paper. Those kinds of things would happen in a remote learning model that was much different than sort of the more sort of laid back version that we did in the spring as we were all sort of reacting to the crisis in the moment. So that's remote learning. I'm guessing there's no questions about that.
Any insight on how we would handle like science labs and things like that?
The science team is actually meeting tomorrow. So teachers, we'll talk about teachers in a second, but teachers are obviously already spending time thinking about how they're going to do this work. Remembering that every student in the country is under the same is facing the same challenge. So we're trying to be as creative as we possibly can to do the best version of school that we can without having kids share lab equipment, for example. So does that mean that the science classes have individual labs where maybe, for the first lab, group A does the lab because we have that much material, but then the second lab, group B does it? The science department's actually working on that. They're starting tomorrow as an example. Every department's doing that. How you teach foreign language remotely, challenging. How you do math remotely, challenging. How you do English remotely, challenging. Everything that we're trying to do right now is incredibly challenging, and the people who are doing it did not go to school to do this. So they're learning and they're working as hard as they possibly can, and they're doing the best that they can. I know that I've been fielding calls and emails from teachers all summer long with thoughts about this and what they're trying to do for kids. So they're definitely hard at work on it. It just, it's going to take some time.
There are a lot of comments in the chat, but I think, I just want to give you it's 6:21, so we should probably just go through and finish the presentation and go back to some of the other questions.
Okay. All right. Well, then you might think all of this is lunacy, and I wouldn't say you're too far off. However, we do have to adopt a model. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share a poll with you. And it says, which of the hybrid models would you prefer? Would you prefer the first version, which was the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday? So the kids are in for 2 days, there's a break, then different group of kids come in on Thursday, Friday. The 1 week on, 1 week off, or an every other day model. So you should be getting a poll right now, and you can place your vote for which one of these do you prefer. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the way we're going to go, but your feedback is helpful. Anne, can you see the results of the poll?
I think, yeah, because I can't vote.
But can you see the
I can see them.
You can see it?
Yep.
It's a neat little feature, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't used it.
So this is obviously something you can do in school, right? Like for
Right.
class,
Yep.
you can say, given what I just said, which one do you think is the best? And then you can
Right.
sort of dipstick the class on how they're understanding the concept. It's nice.
Right.
It's fancy Zoom. Again, you might think right now, oh, I think Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday is the best. And you might change your mind in an hour. Don't feel like you're locked into, you're not locking us into anything. It's just like your best thinking right now. That's what we're all trying to do. And again, like I said, this has to get negotiated with the middle school, the elementary school, and the early learning center. But it's just good data for us to have so we can share with the district. I'm going to give us 30 more seconds, and then I'll just move us along so that we can get to the end and give you guys a chance to just ask.
So the question is, which hybrid?
What, Ann? Ann, you're mute. I can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
Ann is frozen.
Ann's frozen. Okay.
Was it Ariel? Who's
What?
frozen?
Ann.
Who's the frozen?
Is it Ann? It must be because she's not talking. All right, I'm going to stop it here. So, Mr. Friend, for your records, we have about 77% of the high school parents prefer the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And the second runner-up is the every other day. And 9% is, 77% is Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 9% 1 week on, 1 week off, and 14% every other day. But that's out of 172 people in the meeting tonight. So.
But one of the things we all have to keep in mind is that we have to worry about the learning experience for all students. That includes our preschoolers through 12th grade. And we're going to take all this information. And I saw one comment. We have not made any final decisions. And we have teams of teachers that have parents involved in this process that are talking through all these issues every single day. And I also want to just state that I think it's very important that we respect each other's points of view. What this pandemic has done is created a lot of confusion, and it seems like at times people pick sides. Our side has to be the safety and well-being of our students, and I think we have to make that paramount in any decision that we make going forward. But I think the fact that I think it was 185 was the top number of participants as parents. I can't thank you enough. This feedback will help us as we go back. I don't know if Ted said it in the beginning, but our initial plan has to go in on the 31st, and then our final plan goes in on the 10th of August. And then between the 10th of August and starting school after Labor Day, there'll be probably 10 different other changes to our plan based on latest guidance. And I just want to make one other comment about mask. It's my hope that the state comes out and says, if you have kids 6 feet separated in a classroom and there's plenty of room for them to be in and we're allowed to take our masks off, we would do that. But what we're going to do is follow the Department of Public Health guidelines. That's the cleanest, simplest way to approach it, because I don't want anybody getting sick. I don't want anybody getting sick on my watch. We've been through a number of tragedies in this town, and safety and the health of our children and our staff comes first. All right, I'll be quiet now. I'll get off my soapbox.
Okay, Miss Corrin got booted out, so I'm just quickly sending her.
I'm here, but I can't see the chat. I'm on my phone. I can't see the chat.
Well, okay.
Uh-oh, I can't see the chat.
You're fine. All right, so I stopped sharing anyway, and so we're good. So now, I guess, so Ann can't see the chat. There are over 100 people in the chat. So for me to go back through 100 things, I would say is probably not the best use of time. However, you all can just unmute yourself. What I'm going to do is,
And I can give you some highlights too if you want a little bit of direction.
yeah, if you
there were a lot of people wanted to know about the remote model, which we discussed that we're not going to talk about that today. But there were a lot of questions about switching from the hybrid to remote. Are we going to allow kids to do that? Like if they start out in the hybrid model, are we going to let them switch to remote, vice versa? That was one question that kept coming up.
Yeah, I mean, so the short answer is yes. The state has said the kids can go back and forth, but the sort of the more pragmatic answer is, so if you're, let's take a class, pre-calculus, and you've decided that you're going to do remote learning, and so you're going to do remote learning, you're doing remote learning with a teacher who we have no connection to, we're not consulting with, we're just the state saying that this is a qualified teacher who can give award credit in this subject. And then 3 months down the line, you decide, I want to come back to Sutton High School. Well, that teacher did one portion of pre-calculus, and Miss Campbell's on a completely other portion of pre-calculus. Your decision to return to Sutton High School means that you're going to have to go back and relearn the 3 months of pre-calculus that you didn't learn with Miss Campbell. So some classes are going to be easier to jump back into than others. I can imagine, for example, I'm an English teacher. I was an English teacher. You know, whether or not you read a particular book in junior English, it's not really that big of a deal. That's probably an easier class to slide back in for. But for things like math and maybe some of the science classes or maybe some of the AP classes, that's definitely going to be more problematic. So I would say make the decision thinking that this is the decision you're making for the long haul unless something significant changes your mind. That's the way that I think the best way to approach the decision.
I'd like to make a comment on remote learning. One of the things that I want to caution us all on is the state has still not picked a vendor to do the remote learning platform. And so that's what I mean by these plans are not set in stone at this point. They first have to vet the platforms and then demonstrate to us that this platform will meet the needs of the Sutton Public School students. So there's going to be more information to come with this, but I would say what we're going to look for from parents is you need to make pretty serious considerations when you decide to do remote versus in-house, and we really want to minimize that back and forth as much as humanly possible.
And then there was another question towards the very beginning. What are some of the things that we're doing to help transition teachers transition to a hybrid model? Just kind of making sure that, you know, there is some, the kids are getting the same curriculum in school that they would in a normal situation in this hybrid model. I know we have a lot in place this summer that teachers are doing to prepare for this. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, the teachers are, so I mean, again, I'm only speaking for the high school. I think every school is doing it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So I think teachers spent a lot of the spring actually looking at their curriculum and identifying the essential pieces that they wanted to focus on in the spring. So some of the work actually has been done already as far as identifying the essential pieces so that kids are getting what they need to out of biology and pre-calculus and Spanish 3. Some of that part's already been done. What teachers are going to be focusing now on is how do I take the cool group project that I used to do when we would have kids doing blank, blank, blank in school, and how do I turn that into a project where kids are 6 feet apart, they're behind a mask, they're not sharing a marker, there's no poster board, and they might even have to do it remotely. That's the stuff that teachers are spending their time on this summer working on. The district has supported, I want to say we had about $18,000 to provide teachers time to give them to work on that over the summer. There's more professional development time that's going to be baked into the beginning of the school year. In addition to that, we've contracted with someone from Teachers 21 who will be taking our entire high school staff through how to use Zoom effectively, using some like the little poll gadget that I showed that we did tonight. Like that's part of it, but there are whiteboard features. There are other features. I could break you all out into 7 breakout rooms right now, and you could each be having a different discussion in a different room. That's something that typically would happen in a classroom. There are lots of ways where remote learning is a lot more effective than the in-person learning that the version of in-person learning that we're going to all have to experience. So teachers are going to have professional development on that. So teachers are definitely given the time to sort of like work on this part of it, because again, as I said, nobody went to teacher school, and they said, well, when you get out, you're gonna have to teach in a pandemic, and it's gonna be on a computer. That wasn't part of anybody's training. So we are giving them time and time with experts and professional development opportunities, along with some software things. One of the things that we talked about with the faculty last year is like, kids, when we're doing everything on the computer, there can be a real sort of, oh, I'm just going to grab this off a website, cut it and paste it and drop it in as my assignment. That's plagiarism. And so we're going to have, software to help with that. The math department has specific software so that they can do problems in real time. One of the problems that we have in math is that there's a thing on your phone now where you just take a picture of the math problem and it solves it, and it gives you the work too. So if you're really invested in not learning math, that's a way that you can do it. So teachers are working on trying to figure out how to get around it. So that's when I say like virtual learning is going to be a little bit different. That's one of the things that teachers are kind of working on.
Okay, that's all I remember.
Okay.
There were a lot of questions.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to be brave? Share with
I have a question.
Sophia Hernandez?
Yeah, how are you?
Do you teach at Sutton High School?
I'm still there. They still like me, so they kept me to share.
We'll see. All right, what's your question?
So, I'm speaking as a parent from kids that struggle, and they usually go to their teachers after school. You did say that they needed to be out by 2:05. How would they get the extra help? I know that you said that Wednesday might be office hours for the teachers. But as a teacher and a parent, from both perspectives, I see that a little bit more difficult to have a teacher or, students trying to get an appointment for just one day.
Yeah.
So how would the extra help be addressed?
Yeah, no, great question. What the current thinking is, and again, the plans are in progress, but the current thinking is that teachers right now contractually have at least two, and I know full well that most teachers are there every day after school. But contractually, there's at least 2 days where they're required to be after school for extra help.
Yes.
So those 2 days might just be remote. So the kids are out at 2:05. Maybe teachers' extra help sessions are from 3:05 to 4:05 on Zoom. And kids go home, they log on, and they make an appointment with Mr. Hernandez to kind of walk me through the help that I need. Because, it could also well be that teachers are trying to scramble to get out because we have kids who were kicking out the door at 2:05, but there are going to be teachers who have kids who are getting kicked out of their school at 2:05 or at 1:50 or some other time, and they might need to be running home too. So the extra help sessions after school are going to be happening probably virtually for another reason, which is we have to maintain records of all that stuff. So if kids are just kind of wandering around the school saying, "Hey, I'm going to go see Mr. Hernandez for extra help," well, is he really going to land in Mr. Hernandez's room for extra help, or is he going to go check in with his friend, all that? So we have to have a system where we're doing the best job we can to kind of minimize sort of extraneous contacts throughout the building. Other questions?
Hey, Ted, can I ask a question?
Someone chimed in, I don't know who.
I think two of us.
Oops, sorry.
You go ahead, then.
I have a question about the remote learning, and are we basically saying that if kids are doing remote, then they're not learning with their peers, they're learning with all of the other kids doing remote across the state?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Kathy, question?
Yeah, so if you do a four block and they're only registered for 7 classes, so they do 4 the first half of the year. The second half, do they do 3 classes, or do they pick up another class and get to take a class they might not have otherwise taken? Is that an advantage?
No, it is. And if I did mention that, then I apologize. You do have the opportunity to take like an 8th class. That 8th class, well, you have to take an 8th class. That 8th class could either be a study to help you manage the rest of your coursework, or it could be another elective. That now, because because of the way we're doing the schedule, there are fewer kids in the classes, and so it's safer. And so now, if we add 1 or 2 more kids into electives, it's not going to overburden or overtax those teachers, and it's not going to create unsafe space. So if I'm, Natalie, and I want to take I wanted to take public speaking and I wanted to take Art 1, well, now you can take both because you have an extra hole in your schedule that you can fill with an elective that you want.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep. Ms. Schwartz, you raised your hand. You use Zoom effectively. I got to call on you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So my question is, if the vast majority, and I'm saying like at least 90% of parents choose to send their students to the hybrid program, will the hybrid program be able to accommodate all of us?
Yes, we can accommodate. If every student wanted to go to school in Sutton, we can 100% accommodate all those students. We're just, again, the advantage of the hybrid program is that we're not trying to do it all at once. We're not trying to have for example, Mr. Whittier has a civics class right now with 27 kids in it. That's not safe. And so we're not going to be putting teachers in an unsafe situation, kids in an unsafe situation. I just read an article today that in Oklahoma, where they have different regulations, 2 kids got COVID because they were all in one room taking the ACT. So we're just not going to be creating those sort of less safe environments. We're trying to do the safest version of this that we possibly can. But if all 387 kids wanted to come to school, which we would love, all 387 kids can come to school.
Do you have an idea for the class sizes for remote learning?
Not until we know who's going to be walking in the door. But again, I mean, it varies because, you know, an English class, let's say a typical English class, like honors 9 English might have, I don't know, 20 kids in it. So now if we do hybrid, it's going to be 10 kids in the class. So that's obviously then safer, right? But let's say of the 20, maybe 5 stay home remote. Now we're looking at 7 kids in a class. It's just different that way.
But in terms of like the full remote, if somebody just goes for the full remote for the whole year.
Oh, that until we know what they're doing, until we know what the state's offering, I have no idea what that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. 2 other people raised their hand. Let me see. Ms. Graff, go ahead.
Will, is there a list or anything that parents can see to access in case children want to change their elective selections for next year or with that eighth position?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we had, I don't know if I mentioned this, we just met with IPAS today to make sure that our thinking was correct and we can do this. We can, like I said, unless we have some sort of like, you know, awakening between now and probably tomorrow about why we shouldn't do this. This is the direction that we probably will be going in. So now we're just going to rework the classes that the kids have already signed up for. And then the guidance counselors will obviously be reaching out to the kids, because what's going to happen is, you know, North signed up for 7 classes, and hopefully he gets all 7 classes that he signed up for, but 2 of them might be in conflict, so he might have to make a change anyway.
Okay.
And he would then sign up for that 8th class as well.
Okay.
Craig, go ahead.
Hi, this is actually Tina Jagir and Corin. Hi.
How you doing?
Hi guys, how are you? So I was just wondering, would the attendance policy be more relaxed this year? Because if kids have any symptoms, they're probably going to be sent home. And I know the policy is pretty conservative, pretty strict.
Yep. No, I mentioned that at the top.
Okay.
Yeah, 100% it's going to be relaxed. We can't be telling parents to keep their kids home if they have, you know, a slightly elevated fever, then, you know, banging them on the other side if they miss 14 days. So, you know,
Right, yeah.
this is the ultimate, like we all have to trust each other to do the best we possibly can. We're going to be trusting kids and parents to not be like taking days off unnecessarily. We're hoping that you're going to be trusting us to do the best job we can, given the restraints and the constraints that we're under. You know, I know it's, again, like I said, I know that what we do is not going to make everybody happy, but we're doing the best we can with the best thinking that we have. So the attendance policy is one of those places where we're not going to be like micromanaging you. You know, like if the kid's out 25 days,
Yeah.
we're not going to be in a position to say, hey, you know, you should, we could say like, what can we do? Can we help? Blah, blah, but like, we're not going to be withholding credit. But if you miss 25 days of school, then you're missing 25 days of learning. And then it becomes challenging to pass the course.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Great question. Any other questions? You can raise your hand. You can chime in.
I'm sorry, Mr. McCarthy, I have a question.
Yeah.
With the uncertainty of everything throughout the year, and I know this was not even talked about, but what do you think the likelihood of the kids having to take MCAS will be?
Well, state loves MCAS.
Yeah.
So they're definitely going to try to make it happen. I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess right now, because if what I know is that the 9th grade, if you were a 9th grader or a student who needed to pass science last year, that's been waived. If you were a 10th grader last year and you did not take the ELA and the math, the plan was to administer those. When we shut down school in June, the plan was, when we come back in the fall, and I guess people were just thinking we were just going to come back normal in the fall, and it was all just going to go away magically, that we would just deliver the MCAS to those kids when we come back in the fall. Well, clearly we're not coming back to school in the typical way. And so whether the state says maybe we take a pass on that grade, I don't know. For the current 10th grade, the 10th graders who are going to be 10th graders this current school year, MCAS is all in the spring, so I'm sure the state's going to hold on to the last possible moment to give that standardized test. So if I were a betting man, they would probably try to give it in there someplace, but we don't know yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay. Well, I am going to stop recording, and I remembered to record. I'm pretty proud of myself for that.